Hello gang, Tattooed Biker here with you. And I've got something special in store for our ride tonight. You see, I've done several episodes about dogmen, cryptid canines, but tonight's episode is a little different because every single witness actually used the word werewolf in their report. First off, a Southern California family is hiking when they encounter a tall, bipedal creature and are left convinced that they saw a werewolf. Then, a Chicago resident shares her sightings of a werewolf on South Lakeshore Drive. And next, a young Mississippi man and his cousin are on a dark road when they come across a 7-foot-tall, upright cryptid canine that boldly approaches their car. And lastly, a Tampa Florida woman recalls a terrifying experience of being stalked by what she believes was a werewolf. You really don't want to miss this one. Anyways, we're wasting moonlight, so grab your silver bullets and let's ride to werewolf country.
Number 1. Dear Tattooed Biker, this encounter happened when I was hiking with my husband and 8-year-old son. We'd gone hiking to this spot in Southern California where we've been going for the last 13 years. The hiking trails are basically located all along the cliff, and some trails lead to a secluded beach, and others lead to a cave. We took the trail that leads to the beach, and we usually keep walking longer than the average person since we're more familiar with the terrain after the trail ends. At around 4:30 p.m., we decided to hike back up the trail while watching the sunset. At the same time, the moon was rising in the opposite direction. The moon was absolutely huge, and probably one of the biggest moons that I've seen here. We decided that once we got back to the top of the trail around 5:30, to just keep hiking along some other trail which we had been to only once. The night was still young and plenty of families were out walking along this trail. I decided to take a quick break after just to enjoy the scenery and appreciate the moon. At this time, my husband and son were pretty far from me, and all I could see was their silhouette. The night was now upon us, and the fog from the Pacific Ocean was making its way up the cliff and into the hiking trails. My husband and son decided to turn back and meet me because it was getting dark. My son began to run past us. At this point, my husband looks in his direction and sees this black silhouette of a very tall person standing only about 9 meters from my son. As soon as this thing notices that my husband is looking at it, it drops down on all fours and takes off like some kind of animal. He yells for my son to come back. He then tells me what he saw and says that something is running across the trail. I'm terrified of dogs, so the first thing I thought was a stray dog running loose. He says, no, this is bigger than a dog, almost like the size of a bear, but it had the silhouette of a man standing in the middle of the trail, and then it took off on all fours as soon as I saw it. He said that this thing was darker than the dark around us. At this point, we were all freaking out. We were hugging each other close, not knowing what to expect next. We were basically in the middle of a trail that we'd been on only once with a crappy phone service. We looked around and the trail was completely empty, with no one to be seen. We were basically the only ones there. That trail went from being packed with people to now us 3 being the only ones here within just minutes, which really made everything even more terrifying. We decided to just suck it up and walk back to our car, which meant we had to pass by where my husband had saw this thing. My husband said that he saw this humanoid run down the trail, but once we got to that spot where he saw it, the trail turned right, but the figure had run left. To the left, there was a fence and a bunch of tall bushes, making it impossible for something to go that way. Whatever it was would have had to jump the fence to keep going that direction. We never saw or heard it jump the fence, and better yet, we never heard its footsteps or anything moving in those bushes. My husband said it just disappeared. We managed to keep walking along the trail while holding his phone flashlight, pointed at the fence and bushes where he had seen it go. All I had was my water bottle, and I was ready to use it as a weapon. All we could hope for at this time was to see other people along the trail. Then we finally see lights coming from a motorbike towards the end of the trail. This person was going into the trail, and we were relieved to be out of it and into the parking lot. When we finally got to the parking lot, it went from 50 cars to only 2 cars left. There was this couple outside taking pictures. And at that point, even the person on the motorbike noped back out of this trail and back to the parking lot and left. As we made our way to our car, I kind of joked with my husband how he might have seen a werewolf. He was still in shock and didn't say no, but he was still trying to process what he did see. My son said he saw something crawling, and that's when my husband called him to come back towards us. He was really scared that night and refused to sleep by himself, so we all slept in the same room. My son felt like it was following us the whole time on the way home. I sure hope not. Later, we ended up watching this segment on the news by accident while having dinner, and we heard that that day was the super blood wolf moon. Now I'm 90% convinced that he saw a werewolf. I don't know if it's related or not, but this location is notorious for many deaths as it's on a cliff where many people have died from falling over or drowning. When we went there for the first time, there was a sign around about a person who had fallen from the cliff. Thanks for reading. Signed, Mary Beth. Number 2. Dear Tattooed, I don't want to sound like a nut, and I'm sure many, if not most, of the messages you receive begin this way. So I'll just get to it. After watching Unsolved Mysteries, Volume 4, Episode 5, something just resonated. This is something I've shared with anyone who will listen, and that I've even shared on Facebook when it happened, as well as a few paranormal websites looking for answers. I live on the north side of Chicago, but I work for a steel mill in Gary, Indiana, with a 4 a.m. to 2 p.m. work schedule. The toll road system here is too expensive for the everyday traveler, so I use a combination of highways and smaller roads to travel back and forth. That way, it's pretty quiet from a traffic perspective, especially on South Lakeshore Drive, where this event happened. It is still well lit, though I'm sure for safety reasons, as it's right next to Lake Michigan, its bicycle and pedestrian path and public beaches. Back on March 8, 2016, I was traveling from Chicago to Gary on South Lake Shore Drive near 31st Street when I had to slow down after catching something out of the corner of my left eye. I'm very careful at that hour to watch for animals and for teenagers who might be hanging around the lake doing teenage things and then stumbling across the road. I had a heightened alert this morning because of the weather. The Facebook post that I made when I arrived at work even mentions that the high that day for Chicago was going to be 67 degrees. Very, very warm for Chicago on March 8th, a time of the year that still sees blizzard conditions on some years. What I saw was a naked adult, fair-haired, white male, loping across the road from Lake Michigan towards the city neighborhood. When I say lope, I mean down on all fours like a dog and bounding away or towards something. This was not, however, a dog, a coyote, or a fox. It was a naked, full-grown man with his body contorted into the gait of a canine and moving at a really good clip. At the time, I remember just saying to myself, I just saw a damn werewolf. I checked the moon trope for werewolves, and it was actually a new moon. I posted it on my Facebook when I arrived at work. I told a coworker, and he asked, like many after him, why didn't I call 911? What was I supposed to say? Sorry, busy 911 operator. I just saw a possibly transitioning werewolf lope across the South Lakeshore Drive. Over the years, I've shared this story. I've tried to Google other sightings to find similar stories on Reddit, etc., and I've never found anything. I do know what I saw, and by the time I get up for work, get ready, and get about 20 minutes from my house, I'm fully awake. I wasn't scared at the time, just really confused. One sees a weird human stuff in the morning in those overnight hours, but never anything like this. Then I'm watching the Mothman episode of Unsolved Mysteries, and a mother and daughter were talking about a creature with hind legs that were bent backwards crawling out of a canal. Now, what I saw didn't resemble any Mothman sighting that I've ever heard of. What I saw was skin and human-looking, but definitely canine-shaped. The hind leg part of their story bothered me, though. I watched some other videos on Unner-Tan syndrome, and it wasn't that. They keep their backsides high and their legs rather straight. This was like watching a hairless German shepherd with a man's head. The back was straight like a dog, and the legs bent like its hind legs. Bath salts, maybe? I really don't see how that could allow one to contort one's body like that, though. I can still see it in my head, like it was yesterday. We live in a strange and mysterious world with so many unknowns, and maybe that is what I witnessed. I was really hoping that someone else you've encountered, or that you had seen something similar. I'll be watching for it for the rest of my life. I don't want to be the only person in Chicago with this experience. I want to understand what I saw, or at least have it validated with similar experiences if possible. Thanks for reading this. Signed, Amy. Number 3. Dear TB, in the mid-1980s, my cousin and I saw this, well, I'd call it a werewolf. We saw it on a gravel road, but I was raised as a Christian, so seeing something like this, it looked like it was beautiful, but it was evil, and it bothered me for a long time. I came back from Dallas, Texas, to my little town of Winona, Mississippi, where I was raised. My cousin had said, they're having this Christmas party. And I said, look, I want to see a deer. Because, well, I hadn't seen a deer in a long time, since I'd been in the city. She said, well, take this poor house road, this little gravel road between these two main highways. And so we're riding in this little Toyota pickup, and the headlights hit what I thought was a deer. It was kind of hunched over in the road. And she said, look, there's one. And she took off real fast with the bright lights on. And we stopped maybe 25 feet from it, just thinking, it's going to run off into the woods and everything. But instead, it stayed there. And it raised up, and it was like maybe 7 feet tall. But it had its back to us. And a weird, like rabbit or something in its hand. And then it took off. I remember seeing it going off to the right, and just for maybe a second, it got blurry. It kind of moved back and forth. You can't see the pattern on the top because it becomes like a blur when it starts spinning. That's when I think maybe it was from another dimension because the way it spun like that. I mean, it kind of blurred and then it stopped. And then it turned around and walked straight. Not like a regular animal running in the woods to the left and to the right to get away. And then it came straight for the driver's side of the Toyota. I was in the passenger side and was really, it had fur. It had mud on the rump of it, and it was wider in the middle, like you said. It was kind of leaning over toward the front, walking. The legs were like big and bent like a donkey or a mule, but they were like a wolf, and they had that backwards look. It was an animal, but I don't know. I've thought about it for years. I didn't know, did I see a spirit or something? It had mud on it, and it certainly wasn't afraid of us. I think back now, and it could have killed us if it wanted to. It walked right by, and when it got close to the front of the Toyota, it was a two-wheel drive. I was on the passenger side. This thing was so tall that I couldn't see when it got close to the front. And it started walking right down her side of the truck, and she looked up at this thing. She looked straight up at it. I couldn't see what was going on. All I could see was its furry midsection. that as it came by her driver's side window, she made this weird sound like she was sucking in air, like she just looked straight ahead. And I turned around and looked as it walked by the back window, and it just kind of walked funny like on a dog's legs in the back, you know. There are many different kinds when a dog stands up. It looks like it almost crippled when it walks. Its knees were bent backwards. And as it went by, I thought, my God, you know what that was? And then it jumped up on a little sage-grass bank, and it kind of cocked its head and looked at me with its right eye. It never looked me directly in the eyes, like straight over. I think I would have passed out if it did. My cousin, when it jumped off in the woods, she said, that thing just didn't look right. And we're still just sitting there idling. This thing was so bold, it came along her truck and it walked real slow like it wanted her to see it. It wasn't running or anything like an animal. It just walked like that on two legs. It wasn't afraid, and I said, that thing looked like a big wolf. And she looked at me and said, so you saw the same thing that I saw. She later went to the preacher and she asked him what was it. He said some people see demons and some people see angels, but for years it's bothered me so badly until I started seeing sketches of it. I thought, okay, that's exactly what we saw. And it really helped me. Maybe some of your listeners know what we've seen. Thanks. Signed, Chuck. Number 4. Dear Biker, all I know is that the encounter that I experienced frightened me so much that even after all these years, it still shakes me up to just think about it. Until that evening, I've always thought of werewolves as being nothing more than just fairy tales. But that first encounter has left a huge question mark inside of me. I come from a family of skeptics, so I decided not to tell anyone about what happened to me. And then one night my brother came home trembling and pale, and he told me about his experience, and I felt relieved that I wasn't the only one that has seen something. It was after 10 p.m. on New Year's Eve in the late 1980s. We were living in a suburb of Tampa, Florida. It was either 87 or 88. I was sitting out front of my parents' house, and instead of going out with my friends, I decided to stay home and celebrate the new year with my family. My father's car was parked in front of the house by the road, so I decided to sit on the hood, smoke a cigarette, and wait until midnight. The rest of my family was in the house celebrating. After about an hour, I hear this strange sound coming from the neighbor's yard across the street. It sounded as though a man was moaning in pain. The street and the property were dark, so I couldn't see much except for a small light that shined off in the distance on the back part of the property. The wall where that light was sitting, well, it wasn't finished yet. In fact, the whole property itself was wooded with trees and tall bushes. These bushes were around 5 feet high and around 5 feet wide. I kept looking in the direction of the sound to try and figure out what was causing it. My first thought was that maybe someone was hurt, but then the sound changed. It went from a moaning to a low-pitched gurgling and then deep growling. The next thing I heard was a loud thud as though something huge had jumped and landed behind one of the bushes on the back of the property. The sounds that followed were the sounds of something seriously heavy on all 4 legs darting behind large bushes, moving towards me in a zigzag pattern. I started questioning myself as to what the heck this thing could be. Was it a horse or a big dog? It sounded so heavy, and I could hear its breath when its feet hit the ground as it came closer. I heard the growling again, and it was like no dog that I'd ever heard. At this point, it really hit me, and I realized that this thing was coming for me. I suddenly felt the rush of fear go right through me. Then it stopped behind a huge berry bush that was across the street from me, which was about 15 to 20 feet away. It suddenly got real quiet, and I couldn't hear the breathing or the growling anymore. I eased myself down off of the hood of the car because I didn't want to make any sudden movements, especially since it was so close. The front door was about 30 feet from where I was, and I didn't know if I could make it. I didn't know what this thing was, and, well, I really didn't want to find out. I was so scared I could hardly breathe. My parents had a lot of bushes and trees in their front yard as well, so I noticed a gap between a couple of them, and, well, I took off running. As soon as I started running, that thing started coming after me again. I could hear it behind me as it came across the street. I heard its nails scraping the asphalt once or twice as it crossed onto our property. I wasn't about to look back, and as soon as I reached the front steps, I jumped up to the top step and quickly ran into the house and locked the door behind me. I was shaking so bad that I felt like I was going to pass out. Even with the music playing inside the house, I could still hear the thing outside the front door growling, and then it went quiet. I heard another thud as though it had jumped off the step and onto the grass, and then I couldn't hear it anymore. Suddenly, I heard my brother-in-law speak over my shoulder, asking me what I was looking at. I jumped and thought I was going to choke on my words. All I said to him that whatever he did, don't go outside. He started smiling and said, okay. I guess he thought I was joking, but then he realized that I wasn't. As soon as I took a couple steps away from the door, he opened the door and went outside to check. But he didn't go down the steps. He quickly came back in and didn't say anything. I asked him if he saw something, and he said there was nothing there. I didn't tell anyone about it, not even my brother-in-law. Later that night, around 12:30 a.m., after everything had quieted down, I was in the kitchen drying dishes when I heard the most terrible, snarling growl right outside the window from where I was standing. I suddenly dropped the plate I was holding, and it shattered on the floor. That fear crept back in, and I started trembling again, realizing that this thing was still outside, that it was along the side of the house towards the back and not the front. I backed away, still staring at the window, but it was pitch black outside and I couldn't see anything. My mom came into the kitchen and complained about me dropping her plate. I still didn't say anything because, well, I didn't think my family would ever believe me. I did tell my father that I thought I saw someone outside, looking in the window. He grabbed his gun and went outside with my brother-in-law and yelled, trying to scare them away. It must have left after that because they didn't see anything. Until now, my sister was the only one who knew my part of the story. Thank you for taking the time to read this, and please, I would like to keep my name private if that's okay. Signed, Anonymous. And there it is. All the true werewolf encounter stories and reports that I have for you this evening. So, what did you think about these? Were they actually seeing known animals, or some other creature, such as the cryptid canines known as the dogman? Or do you think that they encountered actual werewolves? I can't wait to hear your thoughts and theories about these, but please, keep it respectful to the witnesses. And if you've had an unexplained encounter that you'd like to share, just send your story to the email address in the description, and your experience may just wind up in a future video. Anyways, thank you so much for riding with me tonight. And until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker, out.